Hello. I think we're back in action now. Thank you. Very pleased to be here with you to moderate and to partake in this panel. My name is Paul Tai, and we're very lucky to have with us Hisham Attar and Eva Meneses. And it's a panel in which we're going to look at this question about isolation of the writer. Writers who are isolated may be displaced due to politics, due to events in our world, but also this isolation and displacement that happens to some extent through social media, where people are being exposed and divided and polarized. So it's how to think about, in a polarized world, something that concerned Pope Francis very strongly, his alertness to polarization, how we can heal some of that polarization and how we can do that with the strength of dealing with our own unique voices. So I'd like to invite Hisham to start us on this discussion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much to Tom and Pankaj and the whole team for creating this wonderful and very, very generous and thoughtful encounter. But I have to admit, I'm a bit lost. One of the things that I was thinking about is that very few of you would know this. There's no reason why you should know this, but at some point I was a stage actor. And I had a very good director who told me that when you the first thing that you do when you're on the stage, when you walk on the stage, just take a beat, a second, to breathe in the audience, is how he described it. And in doing so, that would determine the pitch of your first line, how you say the first line. What was really curious about that is that every night it was different because the audience were different. And it really brought home to me that what we say, especially in situations like this and live encounters, is partly determined by the people in the room. A bit like what has been said earlier about the reader finishing the text. And as grateful and delighted I am with everybody in the room, and many of you are people that I know and admire and appreciate very much. I think for the purposes of how I want to think about it, I would like to imagine and ask you to join me in doing this, that this room, the room that we are speaking in, involves other kinds of people, people who might not perhaps on the face of it be interested in these subjects, people of different ages, different classes, different backgrounds perhaps, different preoccupations. And that makes me think of the word dialogue in a slightly different way, because of course in the English its Greek root is through words, right? Dialogus, through words that we might get somewhere by the means of words. But I also want to recruit its Arabic equivalent, which has a slightly different inflection. It's hiwar, which means a bit like the way it sounds. It's uncertain. It is interested in proximities. It's interested in finding a way through, as though the assumption behind the word hiwar is that we have already failed, right? The thing itself has to be approximated in some sense. It also has a suggestion of preambulating, of turning around something. And I think of this also because, of course, of the way that we are thinking about these subjects, because one of the causes for my feeling lost. And I'm saying lost in the best possible sense, right? In the way that you are lost in a wonderful city without really knowing where you're going, is that on the face of it, there's a contradiction between what religion is doing and what literature is doing. That on the face of it at least, religion, and just for the purposes of this, if I can generalize but remain within the Abrahamic family of religions, just because those are the ones that I know better, there is, of course, a great deal of discourse and doubt and vitality, yet also there are some very clear ideas about what is right, what is wrong, how one might proceed, or at least we might have questions about the means, but there is some general agreement, if I can put it this way, about the ends. Whereas it seems to me that literature is involved in something slightly different, or perhaps profoundly different. Literature is excited, or at least the literature that I am interested in and therefore promoting here, is a literature that is excited by a gesture of doubt, by making room, by expanding questions and states of being. And so when I think of questions of isolation, I think of them in terms of perhaps three categories. I think of isolation in the imaginative sense, that we do live in a moment where there's at least a crisis of agreement over what a future might seem like. Our ideas about the future, our visions about the future are seem to be terribly impoverished. But also I would say that our interpretations of the past are also contested. So there is that sense of isolation in a shared imaginative conceptions of the future and the past. There's also a sense of isolation in the political sense. And as I was listening today, actually, we were talking oftentimes about the language of literature, but I felt that we also perhaps mean the language of politics, because those two things are slightly different. And there is an impoverishment in the language of politics. It's not clear to me that there is an impoverishment in the language of literature. In fact, I also got a little bit lost in ways of talking about literature that are solely to do with what's in books. Because, of course, in a pure sense, that's what literature is. But I've known people who can't read and write and have an experience of literature, who have, and I don't mean just through being told stories, but have a sense of what a literary impact is. Just like people who have never seen art have a sense of what art is. So I would also like to expand the definition of literature a little bit in this sense. But to return to a sense of isolation around the political language, which for me also includes questions about economic inequality, and also just in very simple terms, the way the news is presented to us, how contested it is, how unbelievable and varied. But even if it is trusted, each one of us here is getting their news, maybe we can say most of us are getting our news from, give or take, the same sort of number of newspapers, but we're not reading them in the same way, we're not reading them at the same time. It's not really clear that we have a shared conception of how the news arrives at us and the language that it is being told to us in. And then the third sort of sense of isolation that comes to mind is very much, it exasperates the first two and is connected to them. And it's something to do with our covenant with language itself, our sense, and something has been said about this before, of course. Pankaj mentioned the epistemological crisis, and Zaidi also spoke to the crisis of the commons. So the sense that the word itself, words, aren't trusted to mean the same thing in public discourse. But also, I think the other reason why I felt a little bit lost is because I think I might have a slightly brighter view of the situation with literature today. I think it's really quite dynamic, it seems to me. There's just a great many kinds of authors that are being published, that are writing, coming from different languages, but also I can speak in the only other language I know, in Arabic, that there's also, and many people, of course, you could imagine, many people lament this because we are purists when it comes to language, or many are. And in Arabic, there's this whole movement of literature that is written in dialect, not in the high Arabic. And there's something about that that is, incredibly exciting. And in English, English has always been terrible at translation, right? At translating authors. We've always suffered from that. But that seems to be improving. And the various different kinds of voices that are coming in, I think, the variety of voices, if we put questions of taste and quality to one side for a moment, the wide range of voices and experiences, I think, is something to really celebrate. And it also, I think it's a cause for celebration because it hints at the level of appetite that is there from readers. I have other things to say, but perhaps I'll stop now and wait for you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to express my deep gratitude to Tom and Pankaj for inviting me. Only recently, 2 of my books have been translated into English, except for my first novel, but this is 20 years old, so it is really great being here, so thank you. I would like to address the title of our talk from a very practical angle, rebuilding communities, because I'm somebody who has really tried to rebuild a community in Germany. It's just 3 years ago that we founded in Germany a new second Penn Center next to Penn Germany. We called it the Penn Berlin. I would ask you to let aside now the questions why we felt the desire to do that. But when we did it, I said 3 years ago, about between 200 and 300 colleagues, which is quite a lot at the time, it met a huge desire. People were enthusiastic about it, and it raised a lot of hope and expectations at the time. Now I think it should have made me suspicious already, this wave of enthusiasm among colleagues building such a new association. For some reasons, I became spokesperson of this new association together with the German journalist of Turkish origins, Deniz Yücel, who himself was on the Penn case list some years ago because he was in solitary confinement in Turkey, in Erdogan's prison. And the 2 of us, together with a board of 9 people, started this new endeavor. And now I would say for the first 18 months, we really did well. Our motto was to put together the discussions and the panels that we ourselves would attend to. So the goal of this new association from the very beginning we had 2 goals. Of course, pursuing the human rights work that Penn centers are doing. And crazy enough, even before we had a bank account, there was an outcry for help coming also from Turkey. The awarded and renowned Turkish-Kurdish novelist and poet Meral Şimşek immediately had to get out of the country, otherwise she would have gone into prison. So we flew her into Berlin. As said, we didn't even have a bank account at that time, but we managed to get her a flat, a grant, school for her one of her sons, and that was the first goal. Today, I think Penn Berlin is taking care of at least 5 writers from different origins: Morocco, Afghanistan, Turkey, and I think at least 2 from Iran, even though we still don't have any stable funding. But the second goal, and that was very much important to me personally, was to really build a platform for what you could call a real open and honest debate in Germany, what I thought was missing at the time. And as said, I think we really did well. We showed up at both German book fairs. We curated lots of events, lots of panels. Our first Penn Berlin Congress was opened by a keynote speech given by Ayat Akhtar. Most of you know him. So we did really well until 7th of October came and everything was turned upside down. I still say it with a lot of pride that within the first weeks afterwards, Penn Berlin was the organization still doing things, still putting on stage discussions on Israel, on anti-Semitism as well. But we were also the first association that protested against this shameful cancellation of Adania Shiblis at the Frankfurt Book Fair. I myself put up at this particular, in this slot at the Frankfurt Book Fair, where Adania was supposed to talk about her novel, Minor Detail. She didn't come because she was canceled. We took this slot and we put up a reading with 5 or 6 renowned German writers reading from Minor Detail as to give her literary the space she deserved. To cut a long story short, there was not only one shitstorm, but many soon after. Not only because of Adania, not only because we had A.L. Kennedy to be our keynote speaker for the second Penn Berlin Congress, and all of a sudden she was perceived in Germany, you know probably enough about the particular German situation, she was perceived as a BDS supporter, so they told me that we should de-invite her, and I said before I de-invite her, I would resign. So we made it happen, but there was a lot of pressure. And this is what I would like to share with you. We also experienced these toxic structures that social media has put on all of us. People were all of a sudden getting out of the association, telling this publicly on Facebook, on X, wherever. And you know, it is before it was so cool to become a part of this new cool Penn Berlin, it just turned around and it seemed for some days, for some horrible days, as everybody was leaving, because this is also this kind of acceleration that we see from social media. If some particular people are leaving, you have to leave too, because otherwise you cannot, explain it to yourself anymore. It's this kind of mass hysteria driven by digital means. We survived all this. Penn Berlin is still existing. At the end, the last crisis is just half a year ago when we tried to have a resolution against the killing of journalists and novelists and writers in Gaza. That almost tore us apart. At the end, 50 people were resigning from the association, 25 because we are too pro-Israel, and 25 because we are too pro-Palestine. And I kept on saying that apparently something we did correctly. If the people cannot decide what was the reason to get out of an association, then I think we found some kind of compromise. Although I have been discussing with very close friends if this was a good compromise or a wrong compromise, however. So did I fail? Yes, I think so. I also might have put too much hope into this endeavor. Was it worth it? Also, yes. It's still there. We're taking care of these exiled colleagues. And when I think what my final result from today is, I would say that there is such a huge desire among writers to organize, to collaborate, to put something together. But at the same time, also writers are incapable, sometimes, some of them are incapable to live up to their own expectations of what is freedom of speech, what does it mean? And I was like a broken broken record, thank you. Like a broken record, I kept on saying that Penn Berlin should be a platform where everything can be said, where everything can be discussed, and that we should not, never, ever cancel anything before it was heard, before it was delivered as speech, for example, the speech of A.L. Kennedy. So this is what I wanted to share with you. It's just a very fresh experience, and it was quite a challenge, and I do not regret it at all. But we have to be aware that such endeavors are under immense pressure, also by the media. This is my last sentence, maybe. We, from the very first moment on, they were really critically with us, as if we were a suspicious new political party. It seemed to totally escape them that this was kind of a democratic cultural project. My work, I was working basically day and night for 2.5 years, pro bono, of course. I neglected my own work. I lost money, you could say. Dennis was putting aside his journalistic work, but we were, even the ordinary media, the big newspapers in Germany treated us as something suspicious that has to be watched very critically. And I still do not understand. So this is something that I wanted to share with you about speaking of building communities among writers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I come to this as a non-writer. But I begin, my first ever writer in my life was my granduncle Seamus, and not that Seamus. Seamus, who was a minor Irish writer. And when we would go to visit my Aunt Connie, the first thing we'd be warned is, be quiet, behave. Seamus is writing, he's down the back, quiet. So my writers for me are by their nature people who will be isolated, who have a sense of their own protection. So when this thing of isolation just struck me immediately. But I say, not a writer, but an enthusiastic reader. Somewhat provincial reader, but being Irish, that's forgivable. Province, I think, gets there. But down the road from here, I brought Paul Eli to visit it, where James Joyce lived during his time in Rome. There's a monument there to it. And it says of James Joyce, it's a kind of associating, maybe claiming too much for Rome, that this is where Ulysses began in his thought, but that he made of his Dublin our universe. So he took something very particular and was able to find a universal in that. I would say more than particular, it's the complexity of what he was able to take, because his Dublin of Bloom is not the Dublin of most Irish people of that time. It's taking complexity, respecting complexity, and finding something that can reach and speak to somebody who is across the border. And for me, as a reader, that's what I think reading does for me. Reading keeps me somehow sympathetically, imaginatively engaged with experiences that are not my experiences. So one of the things I think, for my own sake, there's an intentionality I have to bring to my reading, to read those writers who are writing about situations and environments that are not within my everyday. And if you imagine the Vatican is a relatively closed environment, but to be there reading writers who are opening you up, not just name one or two. I think Arundhati Roy, Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I'm reading about Hedra intersex prostitutes in Delhi and finding a sympathy for something that's happening in their lives. Even more close to my own experience, reading a Northern Ireland writer like David Park, who's taking me on a journey with an experience that is making me think about cross boundaries, cross borders. So the ability of a writer to capture my imagination, bring me into sympathy with another person whose experience may be different, I think is something that for Pope Francis would be fundamental. He talks about dialogue, he talks about the culture of encounter, but I think it has to begin with an imaginative jump, that I can somehow see and understand in the other, in the strange situation, what's going to touch me at a human level. I think somehow we find values, attitudes, approaches, stories, and ways of living that we know are affirmative of the human experience. And I think writers can do that and bring me into that. And I want to celebrate your achievements and being able to bring me and take me away from what is different. I think, Hisham, you mentioned the thing of, religion and literature. There's a fair bit of doubt around in religion too.
Of course.
And I think that is an important reality that for us, I think any of us, we have to be very careful. I think the day any of us are too at home in our own environment, it's a bad day.
Absolutely.
We keep alive that openness to what is beyond us and what is different. I think of when I think of writers, and I was thinking, Eve, writers for me are very much, I think there's an inevitable individuality about it. The craft itself, there's the camaraderie, there's the support, there's the shared values, but there's an inevitable, extraordinary discipline of being yourself and facing that. As I said, this is somebody who can't write. Don't have that discipline to sit and stay with my thoughts and work on them, trying to make them tangible for another person. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking just two things. Is there inevitable? In the end, the writer is going to have to be faithful to his or her own vision, to his or her own conscience in full, and yet try and build in communion with others. And two ideas, two short quotations I just wanted to leave. One was Seamus Heaney in that one about visiting the Republic of Conscience. And he's coming back, and he's been handed back his passport. And it says, the old man who's speaking to him said, desired that when I got home, to consider myself a representative of the Republic of Conscience, and to speak on their behalf in my own town. Their embassies, he said, were everywhere, but operated independently, and no ambassador would ever be relieved. Somehow that duty to speak and to say what you say, even when it brings into conflict, because you speak your truth as you see it. Related to that, more humorous was, and this is nowadays would be impossible to imagine, John Paul II coming to Ireland in 1979. The writers and the poets dedicated a collection of poems to him, celebrating as they saw an artist coming to visit them. But they had a lovely preface in which they said to him that poets and especially writers, by their very nature of their trade, are not at ease with authority. Each is at the epicenter of his or her own universe. Each is his or her own philosopher, seer, theologian, magician, authoritarian, and pope. So just somehow the balancing of that, the profession and the individual responsibility, the vocation. I don't know if that speaks.
Yeah. I mean, what you said about faith is so true that, in fact, there's no reason to believe if you don't doubt, right? So doubt is very central to it. And I think that's a parallel between faith and between writing, it seems to me, that you're constantly in a state of doubt. But it's also a location. The work of art itself is a location where we go and deposit, or at least for a moment, place, organize, enliven, challenge our passions, right? But it's also a location for the person making the work. It's also a very particular kind of presence. There's a work that was written 300 years before Dante's Inferno, that is also about a poet that goes into the underworld. And it's written by Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri. He's a great medieval Arabic poet. And in Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri's book, which is called Risalat al-Ghufran, the Epistle of Forgiveness, the poet goes to the underworld, but he also rises up to the heavens, because his main motive is to find out who it was that had written the first poem. And eventually he finds the first man and the first woman, Adam and Eve, and interrogates them over this. And it's quite a funny passage, because they're both being a bit coy. You know, they're not really, they don't want to divulge really too much information. So Adam says something like, I'm not saying that I wrote the first poem, but had I, it would have been an elegy for my two sons, for the son who died and the son who killed him. Then he speaks to Eve, and Eve says something similar. I'm not sure if I wrote the first poem, let's just be clear, but if I had written the first poem, it would have been about my concerns for my family, given now that they are exiles, and of course the early exile, they're scattered, they're not together. So they're also not only away from home, but away from one another. And I always thought that's quite an interesting little essay about what literature might be, or or at least not what literature might be, because I find that endeavor terribly problematic. Perhaps we can speak about that later. But one of the things that literature might be concerned about, worried about, enlivened by, is given that you are in a very particular location in time and place, what might you do with time? What might you do with your imagination in relation to time? And Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri gives us two possible, or Adam and Eve give us two possible interpretations. That one is an elegy concerned about the past, about how to measure and define and attribute and contain and carry grief. And the other one is prospecting. Worried, yes, but also hopeful. And is invested in an analogous relationship to fate, right? So I think that might be a clue here, because that not only the work of art itself is a location, but the artist is also thinking about being in a very particular place.
I like the quote that you just gave of Eve, that she would write her first poem about the concerns for her family, because this reminds me of an anecdote that I myself was experienced all the time, and journalists used to ask me why in my books there's so many children and families and patchwork families and stuff like that. And I used to fire backwards and saying, I'm wondering why in other books they are missing. Because you talked about isolation and individualism, for me, to give another practical answer, it's always been both. It takes me so long to write a novel, because in between the novels, I have to go back to life in a way. And I've been always thinking why some colleagues are so, did you say misanthropic in English? Because I think it's, I need to concentrate very deeply when I'm writing, and for quite a while and totally refrain myself from everything. But at the same time, what I'm working on are the relations between people, between human beings, children, parents, patchwork families, conflicts of a very ordinary human kind. So when I'm not writing, I need to go out and kind of mingle with the life around me and watch people and figure how they are functioning. And this is what I think I'm a close watcher, and I have a very good memory. My friends are a bit afraid of me sometimes, but I never ever write about them. But so I think it's like breathing for me, you know, in and out, isolation, and find new ideas and new things to write about, in a way. So I'm not an isolationist.
Thank you. I think we'll open up to questions.
Thank you. Living in Berlin, I know the Berlin Pen story a little bit, and thank you for bringing it up. I was going to ask about that story particularly, not the particularity, sorry, of the story, but actually what is the outcome in terms of building social friendship? Because it's not easy talking to people. Humans are not the most, easy beings, as we all know. And being a writer is actually a little bit choosing to isolate yourself from the mundane and then be on your own and have a relationship with humanity in a more transcendental way, perhaps. So you kind of left it aside, and then you decided that you need an organization because certain things have to be defended. You kept saying that I didn't regret it. It was all good in the end, and so on. But what was it there for people to leave, to fight so fervently about these things? Like, was it arrogance? Was it fear because of Germany's particular situation? What was it really that caused that, going separate ways and finally not really making Pen Berlin as big as it is supposed to be? Because it was a very promising social friendship, beginning of a social friendship. Mm. What was it at the very, if you were writing a novel about it, what would you be saying? What would your diagnosis be in terms of human failures?
Everybody among us who has children knows the situation when you go to school and you have these parent evenings. And usually there are 20 very normal and nice and kind people and 3 totally crazy ones. And the major part of the evening goes to them, to kind of moderate them, to kind of not let them kind of explode the whole thing. And this is with all such organizations. When I'm saying that I don't regret it, then I can really from my heart tell you that I have met wonderful, wonderful colleagues, that I'm still making political things together. We're still having a network. I just got to know you, and both of us are living in Berlin, so we will kind of also link up. So you learn just to differentiate between the people you can work with and that can that share with you this. I looked it up in the dictionary before because I didn't know it in English. The lowest common denominator. This is what I think such a platform should be for writers, yeah? To be in an organization where even people that you don't like, whose literature you hate, whose political viewpoints you hate, can be together because they are writers too, and all of us want to be free writers. I think this is the lowest thing that all of us should be able to connect with. And if people cannot connect with this anymore, then I learned to become as, how do you call it, as open as Dennis is in some parts, and then, okay, then leave. Then you have not understood the idea of this platform. So as said, 50 people left, but we are still more than 600 today. So we grew really quickly within the last 3 years. And I forgot to say before, with the very kind help of international friends, such as Daniel Kehlmann and Ayad Akhtar and Philip Sands, we also quickly managed to get into Penn International. So we are a real Penn Center now, which the others wanted us not to become. But it was a success, and I think that organizations nowadays, under these particular circumstances with digitalization, are facing it everywhere. I mean, you probably, many of you know about the turmoil that was going on in Pan America, also because of the Gaza war. It's a problem, but it can be solved. I think the major thing is to stay together in a way and to compromise very much to have these platforms working. So this is why I still don't regret it. And for the people that left, there are many individual reasons, and some of which I really do understand. For example, some of the Arabic colleagues left in this last crisis with the Gaza resolution. And that was a big, big wound for me personally, because I was working to really, really keep them and to make their voices heard. And I now have become the sidekick of Adania. We are traveling all the time and having events together. But I'm so sorry that I could not keep the others. But there's only some. So.
I have less of a question and more of a little story that I think when you were both speaking, it may be that everybody in the room already knows the answer to this, but for me it was a revelation when I found out 10 years ago, I suppose. So we actually do have a first poet. We don't know who wrote the first poem, but we know who in the historical record is our first named poet. And her name was Enheduanna, and she lived in present-day Iraq in 2300 BC. And what's interesting about Enheduanna is, first of all, that I, a novelist, had no idea that she even existed until I was about 45 years old. No one had ever taught me this, which is very strange. But also what's very interesting is what she wrote. So she was a little bit of a Nepo baby. Her dad was the king. But her task was she wrote these hymns. And this is where it connects to, in a sense, to both of you, is the purpose, what she was tasked with was, how do we allow the Akkadian gods and the Sumerian gods, how do we bring these two traditions together? How can we write in a way such that those who follow the Akkadian pantheon and the Sumerian pantheon at this moment, where we have a king of one and a population at least largely, partly of the other, how do we begin to bring this together? So, in a sense, our first ever poet was Eve, and her task was to heal the suffering of her family. And what she was trying to do was not so different from what you are trying to do at Penn Berlin.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion. I wanted to pick up the theme of isolation from another point of view, and maybe speak to Hisham's point about maybe things aren't as bad as we think. When you look at the relationship between literature and the reader, the author and the reader, we've talked a lot about how social media is helping to destroy thoughtful relationships. But what about at the personal level of encounter with readers? You've been in the business, both of you, Eva and Hisham, for some time. Have you noticed a deterioration over time in the conversations when people come up to you at a book fair after a presentation, or when you meet someone at a party? Is there reason for hope in those human relationships, or are those also being impacted by the wider forces we've been tracing in our conversations?
I mean, I find it very difficult to speak authoritatively about this in some general sense, obviously, because everything I know is just from my own personal life. But if I am to search why I am perhaps a little bit more optimistic, or it's really inspired by my students, I have to say. I mean, I find them really quite remarkable, and I teach at Barnard College, which is a college that I'm sure you've read about in the news, because we've been so involved in a lot of the problems that have been happening in America. And the courage, intelligence, but also steadfastness, but also a sense of calm, reasoning, completely the opposite of how they're often portrayed, sadly, by some of the media and some of our administration, I have to say also. That they're just remarkable, and in the absence of support from institutional support, the kind of networks of support and counsel that they've extended to each other it's just really, really inspiring. So that's an extreme example, but much more. I've been teaching now for 14 years, and in these years, again, these students have shown me to what extent they are invested in the life of the mind, in doubt. And actually, I think now, don't get too excited, but I think I've just undergone a conversion here, because I do think that the dissonance that I was pointing to between religion and literature is maybe was too hasty, because on some level they're both invested in, not only in doubt but also in literature, of course, right? I mean, particularly actually when you think of the of Islam, because the Quran is the foundational text of the language. It is also the burden of proof, right? It's the burden of proof is the inventiveness of the text, and so it holds a particular register in the culture. That's another subject, but it's also complicated the relationship of the writer to the language, and that's why I think in Arabic literature you get a lot of attempts to bring down the language, to make it available to scandal and to sex and to adopting the words of the street, if you want to put it that way. So the Arabian Nights, for example, the Arabic text is really, really outlandish, and my dear grandmother, who knew it by heart, would censor out all the bad bits, So I didn't know that there were any bad bits, because she would just, But then I remember the effect of it when I read it, when I could read it, how scandalized I was by this language. And this is an ongoing question that I don't think, of course, it's particular to the Arabic language and its history and so on. But I think in thinking about literature and one of the things that it does, I think it is interested in this repertoire of the heights and also the lows. And that's why maybe I'm more excited than I perhaps should be about bad literatures too, right? There's just some information that perplexes me. I'm not even sure yet how to read it, but there are certainly more people reading. There are more books being sold. That's not necessarily a good thing. I'm just saying it's an interesting thing, and it pays for us to think about it. Is the book in crisis? Probably. I don't know. I would like some data. Is the book in crisis? And it's in crisis against what exactly? Because it strikes me that reading and writing have since time immemorial, been a minority sport. Now, I'm very much for it not remaining a minority sport. I'd like somebody to tell me how, literature can become the major leagues. I'd like that, What's that? TV, right? Yeah. So I think my optimism, if it is optimism, it just arises from all of these things. And also, I have to say that I just have a very, I don't know what literature is. One of the reasons I'm so enlivened by it is I don't know what it is, and so all this activity around it in different languages and so excites me on that level. Very little of it is good. That's where we are.
I would like to just briefly come back to your question, Tom, about the audience. My experience is, or I put it that way, the audience that is coming to my readings and my events and speeches, they are my big comfort. Of course, these are only the people that come to readings because they like literature and they like what I'm doing. But I find them the last reasonable people around, and they come. No, they really come. Besides joking, they come because I think that they want to celebrate our freedom. I think in the way the world looks today, with all these problems of digitalization and artificial intelligence, I think we should never underestimate our role, because we're the last free people. In Germany, where this situation is really particular, I have so many good friends that are scholars and academics and really renowned people that are running institutes and universities, and they are researchers, and they cannot speak out because they have to protect their institution. So it's on us in a way, and I feel also freed since I'm not spokesperson of PEN Berlin anymore, because I do not have to be careful for the organization anymore. I'm just speaking in my name again, and this is in a way really relieving. What concerns me is the role that ordinary media plays in this game, because I think they are constantly missing their readers and the people, because they are leading discussions that have nothing to do with what the ordinary people think, and they're so secure about what they are doing. The media, I mean, maybe it's only a German phenomenon, but I think that we novelists, we are almost moderators between these two worlds, and I like it even more nowadays to go out and talk to the people, also on politics.
Safwan in the back.
Thank you. This is fascinating. And Hisham, you probably knew that I would come back to what you were talking about in terms of the language and Arabic language in particular. And I found it fascinating what you were saying about how literature tries oftentimes to become more accessible, right? And I think it's important to note that the Arabic language, even though it predated Islam, because it is the language of the holy text, the Quran, it has not evolved over the centuries the way other languages have, because it is sort of the language of the holy text. And as a result, or maybe one of the reasons why today Fusha, which is the formal Arabic, the modern standard Arabic, is the language of the minority of people of the region. It is the language of political speeches, it's the language of literature, it's the language of TV newscasts, correct? But what everybody, you and I, and Nasreen and anybody else who speaks Arabic, we don't speak a different dialect. We speak it's a different vernacular. The Dariji of the Maghreb is quite different than the Arabic spoken in the Levant. And in the Gulf, where I live now, I have to sometimes translate certain things into a vocabulary that I am familiar with. And it sort of, I mean, I've tested this with a couple of linguists. There is a corollary of sorts between Latin and Romance languages. And, some scholars would argue that some of the Romance languages are mutually intelligible, more so than the spoken Arabic in different parts of the region. So my question, there is a question in this, in your concern about the book and literature. If literature tries to become more accessible and to integrate into it some of the more street, if you will, language, does that make it more accessible across the region, or does it make it less accessible across the region? Because at least across the region, those who read Arabic, at least we can all agree on what Fusha is. We can all communicate in Fusha.
Sure.
Thank
I
you.
mean, just to state the obvious, I'm not promoting literature written in dialects necessarily. I'm not even sure it's something that I enjoy, right? In fact, I'm sure it's something I don't enjoy because I've read it. I don't enjoy it. But nonetheless, I mention it only to say that the appetite and the facility to remake what happens in a book is evidenced in it, right? And that excites me. And also to state the other thing that's obvious is that I write in English, as you know, and so, but my relationship to Arabic is a relationship of a reader and a quote unquote native speaker or once native speaker. But so everything I'm thinking about with Arabic, it's really just to hope to say something about the nature of language in general, right? The way that it is all translation. It is all us trying to find the right words for the thing that, Edgar Allan Poe said, the secrets that do not permit themselves to be told, right? It's a very interesting way of putting it, because it's not the things that I'm not sure I want to, it's not the secrets that I'm not sure I can trust you with. It's the secrets that don't permit themselves to be told, right? So the hope that he has in language, and I think the hope that all writers have in language, is that we might come upon the thing that doesn't permit itself to be told.
So you worry about the book in Arabic in particular, I think is very, very well placed, right? Because when I read you, when you write in English, I'm reading the same English that I communicate in, the same English that I speak. Whereas if I pick up a book in Arabic, I'm reading something that I do not, the words and the grammar and
No,
everything.
there is an issue. There is an issue, but I think it depends. There's a lot of work that has happened in this. A writer like Naguib Mahfouz, for example, has managed to find a language. This doesn't come through in translation, but one of Naguib Mahfouz's, in my view, great literary achievements is that he found an Arabic that sounds like the Arabic you would speak on the street in Cairo, but no grammarian can fault it. So it's quite, so there are exceptions, and I think there's a whole generation of Arabic writers, Gamal Dunqal and all of these guys, that tried to find a language that would, but you're right, every time you sit down and write a book in Arabic, you're having to respond like, in English it's Shakespeare, in Arabic it's the Quran, So you're always constantly, but it goes back to this point, that's why I think Al-Ma'arri was quite interesting, because he is thinking about the past and the future. He is thinking about a possibility of breaking or defining. But he's also thinking of something that we haven't spoken about, which is that no matter what literature is doing in whatever language and whatever genre, I think it's constantly interested in an attempt for connection, for creating a continuum, creating something. There's a wonderful quote by Proust where he thinks about this. He thinks about, in the second volume of his endless novel, there's this wonderful passage where he's just overcome with beauty. He said, chestnuts are in blossom, and he's in a carriage and he's moving fast. And he keeps seeing all these figures, all these young ladies. And they're so wondrous to him. They're so endlessly, infinitely beautiful. But abstract, because he's passing at speed. And he thinks, what happens if I were to go back and speak to one of them, whether the whole thing would collapse, And he says, I want to read you this line, because it's a beautiful line that he ends with this thought. He goes, for beauty is a sequence of hypotheses which ugliness cuts short when it bars the way that we could already see opening into the unknown. For beauty is a sequence of hypotheses which ugliness cuts short when it bars the way that we could already see opening into the unknown. I think that's also, something for us here, maybe at what literature is involved in. A kind of creating connections, but also creating an opening, a way that you could pass through that you don't know where it's going necessarily. It's not transactional in that sense. Yeah.
Okay, I gather quite clear there. 4-letter word stop. Sorry, Zadie, I've been told to. So thank you, the two panelists, very much, Eva and Hisham, and thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank you.